where I was put in a situation of a forced landing. One time, a round had severed my fuel line, and so my engine quit and I had to put it down. Typically, when that happens, a lot of times you'd fly single ship, missions, but usually when you got into some deep trouble is when you were on a combat assault and you had other helicopters around you. So if something happened where you were in a situation to make a forced landing out in the middle of nowhere, generally there was somebody close enough to come be able to pick you up within a very short time.
Mm-hmm. You were grateful to see that.
Oh, absolutely. I was not meant to be a grunt, an infantryman.
Oh, goodness. Well, so how many days consecutively did you work before you got a break from that? I mean, that's high stress.
Well, that's an interesting question. Generally speaking, probably 5, 6, 7 days before, until you got a day off or so. In my case, I took my check ride and became an aircraft commander in August of 1971. And because of the operation that I talked about earlier, the Lam Son 719, during that operation, the Army put a big influx of pilots from different units all into the units that were participating in that operation. So come about July, August of 1971, a lot of pilots whose tour was up went home. And so we were faced with a situation where we were extremely short on experienced pilots. In my unit, and particularly in 2nd Platoon, which I was in, the average, I believe that if I'm correct, the average strength for a platoon would be 12 aircraft commanders. And at the time I made aircraft commander in August of 1971, in the 2nd Platoon, not including platoon leader, we only had 3 aircraft commanders. So we are extremely short on experienced pilots. So in answer to your question, there was a stretch of time where I flew over 60 days without a day off. I had gone to the flight surgeon 4 different times. You were only allowed to fly like 100 hours a month. And I had 4 waivers to go over that 100, got a waiver to go over 100 hours, and I think it was to 120, and I passed that and had to get another waiver. So we were, we're very, very short on pilots. So I think it was on if I recall, it was on 68th or 69th straight day that I finally got a day off.
Good, yes. But you just stayed where you were. I mean, you didn't get a chance to go to Hawaii or...
Oh, no. A day off was like, you just didn't have to fly that day.
Yeah. Yes.
So no, it was, as far as during the tour, you could get an R&R, which were like 7 days, and you got to pick your destination. You go to Hawaii or Bangkok or, something like that. And usually that was like somewhere midway between, in your tour. But as far as on a daily basis, day to day, it was hard to tell what day it was. Sunday, Tuesday, Saturday, they were all the same.
Goodness. Well, and as that came to an end then, tell us about leaving Vietnam and where you went from there.
Well, actually, like I said, I went to Vietnam on January, I want to say 16 of 1971. So technically my tour should have gone through January 16th of 1972. At that time they used to give what they call early DEROS. DEROS is when you left Vietnam. If you were, within so many days of Christmas time, they would send you home early so you could be home for Christmas. I missed it by 1 day. I didn't qualify. But on the next day then, when I came back in from flying, they told me you need to go see the battalion commander, report to his office. So I went over there and he told me that my grandfather had passed away. The Red Cross had got a hold of him. And then he says, you missed early Neros by 1 day, didn't you? I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, since your grandfather died, you only missed by 1 day. He said, I'm going to cut orders and send you home. So I had 12 hours to pack, catch a plane, and I made it home on December 19th of 1971. I was still in my flight suit. It had been raining. I was soaked to the bone. Got on the plane at Da Nang Air Force Base. Flew to Yokota, Japan. We didn't have much of a layover there. And we went from there to Anchorage, Alaska, and again, not enough time of a layover. And then they flew us to Seattle, Washington. That's the first time I had the opportunity to change out of my wet flight suit from Vietnam into, Class A's or my dress uniform. And then from there I flew to O'Hare Airport, and my family didn't even know I was coming home yet. And so I was going to call them and say, hey, I'm home, come get me, or something like that. And I looked up and there was a sign that I could take the bus out to my hometown for $3 or something. So I did that, and when I got there, the bus dropped me off at the bus station, and I was going to, again, call Dad and say, come get me. Then I decided, the heck, I just called a cab, and I took a cab home, and I showed up on the doorstep. Much to my mother's surprise. I think she wanted to faint, but she caught herself.
Oh, I'm sure she was so happy.
She was.
Oh,
she was.
That's wonderful. Well, now, you had 4 brothers and sisters. Was any of them in the military?
My brother was.
At the same time that you were?
No, he was older. And he had joined the military, and he was in an MP, military police. He went to Germany. He spent 3 years, I believe, in the military also. He enlisted. He went to Germany, did his time in Germany, and then came home. Got out of the military and went to work in the Chicago police force for 30 years.
So your mother had 2 sons, but you were the only one in combat.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. My grandfather had served in the Spanish-American War, but never went to Cuba. He never left the States. My father was kind of unique. In World War II, after Pearl Harbor, he joined the Army, and he was born and raised in Chicago. He did his basic training at Fort Sheridan in Chicago, and then he did his advanced training there as well, and become a hospital orderly or something. I'm not quite sure, and then they assigned him to Fort Sheridan, and he spent his entire time, never left Chicago. All of World War II in Chicago, never left. So I'm the first one that I know of in my family that actually, went off to war. Other than I had an uncle that was in North Africa in World War II, but as far as immediate family, I was the only one.
And would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Were there friends of yours from high school that joined with you, or about the same time?
There were several friends from high school that went in the military about the same time. And actually, 3 of them, actually more than that, but there were 3 others that signed up to go to flight school and went to helicopter school, but all 3 of those, didn't make it. They flunked out for one reason or another. I had 2 other high school classmates that did go to flight school at different times than I did. One had graduated, came home on leave, and unfortunately had got killed in an automobile accident while he was home on leave. The other high school classmate of mine, he went through flight school before me, went to Vietnam. He was a medevac pilot, and he was killed in Vietnam. So,
well, what did you do after the service?
Well, at the time that I came back from Vietnam, of course, it was 1972, it was winding down. And the Army had figured out that they had way too many helicopter pilots, and they couldn't sustain them. So they came up with a program. I still had 2 more years to serve on my term, but they came out with an early out program. In other words, it would be my choice. I could choose to stay in the Army or get out. And at the time, I was married, and my wife at that time didn't want me to stay in. So
now, did you marry before you went to Vietnam?
I got married right before I went into the service.
Oh.
Young love and all that good stuff. So yeah, I was married the whole time I was in the service and in Vietnam. Matter of fact, my first daughter was born while I was in Vietnam. As a matter of fact, I had mentioned before that I had gotten transferred from the Cav Troop to the 173rd. And that was kind of funny in itself, in that my hooch maid, we lived in these huts, and we had hooch maids, which we'd pay, I don't know, a couple of piastres a day or something to come in and do our laundry and shine our boots and that sort of thing, make our bed. I came back from flying one day, and she came up to me and she was crying. And she said, and I said, "What's the matter, Mama-san?" And she says, "I'm so sad you leave." I said, I just got to Vietnam, Mama-san. I ain't going nowhere. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but she kept insisting that I was leaving. Well, the next morning, they came to me with secret orders transferring me. And so, she knew that ahead of time. So I guess the Vietnamese clerk typists in the office would type the orders. They knew all about it. But in March 7th is when my daughter was born, which was right after that I had gotten transferred. And so when the Red Cross sent word that my daughter was born, they couldn't find me because I was transferred on secret orders. It took them 3 weeks to track me down.
Oh, my goodness.
So I got a phone call like at 3 o'clock in the morning one day and said, "Oh, by the way, this is the Red Cross and you have a daughter." So I always, my daughter's birthday is March 7th, and I always tease her. I always say, "No, your birthday is March 28th," because that's when I found out.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, and then like I said, after to answer your question, so my wife's insistent I got out of the service, and then I got into the food service distribution business.
Wow.
So, and that's what I did for 42 years.
My goodness. Well, that turned out to be a good career.
It did, actually, yes. Yes, it did.
Well, were there lessons that you learned during your time in your service that have served you well for the rest of your life, or your life to now? I won't say the rest of your life. But.
Well, yes. Yeah, actually, I mean, it would be foolish to say that I didn't. I think it's easy when you're young, 18, 19 years old, to just kind of brush everything off. And basically, I just learned the basics of life, responsibility, loyalty, just having a goal or a mission and making sure you complete it. Life lessons, yes. I think what I carried with me back from Vietnam was the little stuff doesn't matter. Just not let it get to you.
Yeah. Really helps to put things in perspective when you're faced with this.
It does. Yes, it really does. And it's one of I think the amazing things is the the friendships and the bonds that you develop. My 2 best friends in the world, I probably knew them for 6 months out of my entire life while I was in Vietnam. My 2 roommates at different times, and you know, you lose touch over the years. So I hadn't seen them and talked to them in 30 years. And, you know, 10, 12 years or so ago, we found each other and reunited, and it just, we're brothers.
It was as
Yeah.
if you'd never been away.
Yes, and their families, my roommate Jim Hansen was my roommate. You know, his daughters are my nieces, and my kids are his nephews and nieces, and we just all get along. As a matter of fact, he's the reason that I have PTSD. Jim, we had in our hooch, we had reel-to-reel tape players, and Jim was married at the time to a lovely wife, Mary, but he had this song that he would play by the Carpenters, We've Only Just Begun. And he had it on the reel-to-reel tape. And if you remember on reel-to-reel tapes, they had metallic sensing tape you could put on that would stop and start.
Yeah.
So he put sensing tape on both sides of that song, and he would play it every single night. So the song would play through, We've Only Just Begun, hit the sensing tape, reverse, and play again. And it would go all night long, over and over and over again. We've only just begun. Got to the point where I thought I was losing my mind. I hate the Carpenters. But it was like torture. But I give them a bad time about that all the time.
Well, goodness, sounds like quite an adventure. Is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't covered about any stage of the time?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Other than you know, for a bunch of young kids. Excuse me.
That's why the tissues are there.
I'm sorry. I guess that's it.
A lot of bravery. And a bunch of young kids. Well, let me come over there. I want to officially thank you for your service and to give you this Veterans History Project pin.
Oh, thank you.
And to say we certainly appreciate your service to our country.
Thank you very much.